the number one problem that most people deal with in life is that they don't believe in themselves enough. Rather than thinking of if it's going to happen, I think through the lens of when it's going to happen, because I know it's going to.
You can too, but can you? This individual is someone who is constantly seeking the better sides of himself. Someone who's also seeking the wisdom of others and then sharing those insights in hopes to help make your life a little bit better. I'm really excited to welcome today's guest, a podcaster, a coach, someone who's been doing this for a long time. Even though he's got youth on his side, it also seems like he's got a little bit more wisdom than some other kids and men, young men in his generation. I'm very pleased and excited to welcome a fellow podcaster, a friend, Mr. James Brackin, the host of the You Can Too podcast. How are you today, sir?
I am great speaking with you, man. I appreciate that. That was an amazing intro. I appreciate you, man. I'm excited to dive into some amazing topics. We were chatting a little bit before this, and it's always great to connect with other podcasters, man. So I appreciate you for having me on.
I think what's unique about you is that you're a very young man, 20 years old, and yet you have 200 episodes of a podcast. You've been coaching since you were 17. Some people might say that's a little bit too young. How can you coach me on what life is? What do you say to those people?
I thought the same thing when I first got started. I definitely did. And what I realized was, so I joined a coaching program of about 1,000 coaches. And what I realized within joining all of those coaches, I was the youngest person. To this day, I was still the youngest person in that coaching program. The imposter syndrome and fear and doubt and everything that I had, every single other person had. So I was like, it can't be my age because everyone else has this as well. When it came down to trying to do sales calls or figuring out how to market yourself or whatever it was, I was the first one raising my hand. And when everyone else didn't want to put themselves out there, I was the first one raising my hand to learn, to fail, and be the one that was open enough to fall, to be able to succeed. And so I think that that was a thing for me. I think the one big thing that really came to me as well was a lot of people think coaches have to have the answers. I definitely did when I first got started. What I realized was that you have to have the questions, because really what coaching is help challenging people through asking questions that they don't ask themselves at the end of the day. Most of the time, we just need an external perspective, and that's what I've been able to be to my clients.
I think it's super impressive, the fact that you've been doing this for a couple of years. I also like the extreme awareness that you have in terms of recognizing imposter syndrome at a super early age and then saying, why not me? Why can't I do this? And the way that you have this self-confidence about you. When did you start to realize that you could too?
Through most of my life, I played the victim mentality, wasn't the confident person, did not see myself as someone that could become confident. When I left school, I took a lot of pride in never reading a book throughout pretty much my entire life. And then I started reading books that actually changed the way I thought about life in itself. And when I realized that I could change the way I looked at myself, change the way I felt about myself through whether it was a gym, I think that we talk a lot about that when it comes to just changing your physical body and seeing that you can make changes in yourself. Well, you realize, okay, maybe this can transfer to mental as well. And so when I started reading books and it changed the way I thought about myself, I took in information that I never really knew existed. It showed me that if all I had to do was just create proof and evidence to reinforce why I can become a confident person, or I can create a top 1% podcast by the age of 18 or 19, whenever I was, it's just proof. And at the end of the day, it's just showing up, doing the things that most people don't want to do. It's simple, but it's not easy. That's for sure.
It's the books, or it's the actionable strategies that you take from the books? Could you parse that out a bit more for us? It's interesting, right? Because you, again, self-awareness, you prided yourself on not ever having read a book all throughout high school, very similar to me. And then one day, it just like, I started to think, what if I started to read? I already think I'm kind of smart. Law school changed a couple things. I developed a discipline to sit down. Obviously, you're 20 years old. It's a bit different. I'm not even sure if you're in school. I don't think you are, actually.
No, I never went.
And what's interesting about that is I actually have 8 years of education under my belt. You have 0. You're a host of a top 1% podcast, as you were saying, over 200 episodes, interviewing multimillionaire entrepreneurs, hundreds of millions of dollars under their belts, and coming on your podcast, sharing their insights. You also have a few more incredible opportunities coming your way, which we were talking about before. I'm super excited for you. Is it the actionable strategies that you were taking from the books? How are you taking what you were reading and then putting it into action?
I think a lot of people get caught in, and I definitely was caught in this as well. When I first started reading books, I thought there's so much information here. I just want to continue to read. And the first year I started reading books, I probably read 50 or 80 or however many it was. That's all I wanted to do was read books, but I didn't implement anything. And that's what I realized. And this year I probably read 10 or so, and that was research for guests that I had on the show. And so I definitely decreased the amount I've read, but it was recognizing that I had to put it into action. And I think really this was the big thing for me was when I invested to the coaching program was around the same time that I started reading books and started listening to podcasts and even thought about starting my own. And man, I invested more money than I had, putting my back against the wall and just really betting on myself. Like I said, I never went to school, never went to college. I bet on myself from the age of 17, as pretty much as soon as I got out of high school. I was even becoming a real estate agent. Never ended up getting my license, but was working with people in real estate at 17 years old. They looked at me like I was crazy because I was the youngest person in Keller Williams in upstate New York. Like I was always the youngest person in most things that I did. And so I just continued to bet on myself and trust my intuition. And I think the investment in myself was the thing that really made me look at myself through a different lens and be like, okay, you bet on yourself now. You want to get the results. You need to take different action. And that was the thing that really switched for me, I think, in my brain.
It's probably very humbling to be the youngest person in the room. How do you manage that aspect? You talked about it at the top, the ability to identify imposter syndrome, why not me? How do you feel in those situations? How are you still able to manage your mindset? What types of questions are you asking yourself? And how are you getting yourself to that level head where you realize that you're just as capable? You outline the evidentiary aspect of it, but how much evidence can someone really acquire by 20 years old to start to realize they could keep up with people who've been doing this for 20 plus years?
I think it's just speaking with those people that have been doing it for 20 plus years, right? Like through the podcast, it's been awesome to remind myself. Like I can think of Mark Sisson, I had him on the show, sold his business for $200 million. Like the fact that I'm speaking with this person and he's done profound things throughout his life, but at the end of the day, he's still a human and it's still just a person that I'm speaking with, just brings it down to earth. And the last question I ask every guest is, what belief are you currently unlearning? Because I want to bring humility to the people that people look at are as though they have everything figured out, whether it's Seth Godin or Mark Sisson or whoever it may be, Gary Brecka. Like I can name so many different people that everyone looks at like this person has it all figured out. And when I ask them that question and they get themselves in a position where like I don't even know the answer immediately, like I have to think about this question because it brings humility into them, and not even through the aspect of they're too overly confident or anything, but I think people put people on a pedestal too much to the point where we put ourselves in a position of lack. And so asking that question and asking those kind of questions that makes people think, I think brings those kind of people down to earth through the lens for at least my audience. So I hope to do that. And I think that brings it into perspective for me, for sure, when I'm in those rooms.
So I've actually listened to a couple of those episodes. I listened to the Gary Brecka episode. I listened to the Mark Sisson episode. And I found myself asking, is this kid really 20? Like for me, that's probably the most impressive thing about it, that you have this incredible amount of wisdom. Like by the time I was 20 years old, I'd finished the Israeli military. I was a private pilot. I was starting college, and I had all these awesome accolades under my belt. But I wasn't out here telling people how to live life. I was still learning, or not that you are, but I didn't think I had enough experience under my belt to really parlay it into what you've created for yourself. And I think it's awesome because I didn't have the same amount of self-awareness that you do at 20. And I think I'm not the only person that realizes it, because you have these multimillionaire entrepreneurs coming onto your podcast reaffirming it, right? Like you're talking about evidence. And I also think that the depth of the questions that you bring to the podcast that you host is phenomenal. And the guests recognize it as well. I'm not in isolation in this regard. So how do you go about curating the questions into your podcast? How do you know what you want to ask them?
It's funny because I just posted a clip on socials about just a bunch of the people that I've had on the show. I had Noah Kagan recently on the show and a bunch of other people saying great research and stuff like that, because I want to put that out there. Like the one thing I care about most when people come on the show is if they don't leave feeling seen in some way, I didn't do my job. And so when it comes to like asking the questions, I think a lot of the mission that I have for the podcast, right? Like I always think of, and I'll give the example of the chair that I'm sitting in, the chair that you're sitting in, the podcast mic that we're using was once a thought in someone's mind. and it wasn't in the world, but then it became in the world because someone was crazy enough to think that it was a possibility. And so that's the you can too mindset of whatever you think you can't do, someone else has probably done it or is going to do it. You just have to believe big enough to be able to recognize that it's possible. And so I always think through that lens of the questions that I ask people, whether it's Mark Sisson, Gary Brecka, whoever it is, where did they start? Because a lot of people see where they're at, but they don't see where they started. And they think that that massive gap is something that they can't close within themselves. But if we break down from where they started to where they are now and break down a lot of the things that they had to overcome, a lot of the beliefs that they had to let go of, and a lot of the things that they had to overcome, I think, again, it brings people down to earth in a sense that, yes, it may feel as though Seth Godin, 21 international bestselling author, is so far ahead. But when he was first getting started, it wasn't that way. Bridging that gap and allowing other people to see the gap, that it doesn't have to be so big, that the incrementalism of it in itself is something that anyone else can accomplish, I think is a really big part of it. So I think through that lens when I ask questions, and I also want to ask questions that they don't really get asked, because I think the perspective that I have, right? You said I'm 20 years old, I have a different perspective, and they don't expect those questions, I don't think. And so asking those kind of questions, asking the deeper questions that most people aren't really, most people don't ask, I think just provides a different perspective. And me being young just also provides like a different answer than they're probably usually open to asking, I think, or usually answering, I would say.
It's super cool, man, because you've really distinguished yourself as a young man where the quality and caliber of the guest, the depth of the questions, like I was saying before, were there goals that you had set for yourself along the way in terms of, hey, I have ideas and I want to share them. I want to start a podcast. I want to help people believe in themselves. And I want to be able to interview high quality individuals. Can you outline the strategy and the framework that you created for yourself and the roadmap that you created for yourself in order to get this far in your podcasting and entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, I'd say the one thing that has been difficult for me, and I think a lot of people struggle with this, is vision. Like when people ask me, because I've been on other podcasts, they'll ask me, where do you see yourself 5, 10 years from now? I'm like, I have no idea. My 1 year plan or goal is probably going to change in itself. So why would I even shoot for 5 years? Like I have no idea where I'm going to be from then. So the thing that has always helped me, like we spoke about earlier, my first 100 episodes were solo episodes. And it was not easy showing up, sitting in my car when it was steaming hot outside or it was freezing cold and I'm recording in my car. Didn't feel like there was any progress being made there, right? And so people want results, but they don't want to show up enough times to actually get those results. So the only thing that I have thought about really through most of this podcasting journey, coaching journey, whatever it is am I moving in the direction that I want to be moving in? Not so much am I getting the results that I want to get. Because if I'm moving in the direction that I want to be going in, and I believe as though I'm speaking with people that I want to be in their position in some regard, or they're doing things that I want to do, there's no way, it's inevitable that I achieve what I want to achieve. So I almost disassociate, I detach myself from the goal that I want to achieve or wherever I want to get to, and simply just focus on the day to day, the boring stuff that most people don't feel like doing. I always say that the 20% of what you do is going to have 80% of the impact. Everyone knows that, right? But that 20% is usually the boring stuff that most people don't want to do. And so I think being able to show up for the monotonous work every day that is just boring and I don't really feel like showing up for is the only thing that's allowed me to just continue to show up every single day, I would say.
It's actually really cool that you say that because today I was posting content and thinking, like, what do I want to say? A lot of people have systems for how they go about curating their content. For me, sometimes I'm 5 days ahead. Some days,
Yeah.
I don't know what your strategy is. Sometimes I'm 5 minutes ahead. You know, we're all managing our time differently. And today, when I was thinking, what do I want to say? I was thinking about moving the needle. And I've talked about moving the needle before, but then I started to think a bit deeper, like what is the needle measuring? And so where you're talking about sitting in your car and not feeling like you're making any progress, and then you have enough depth of thought to say to yourself, as long as I'm moving in the direction, sometimes we zig and we zag, but we're still moving forward. And I think that's an underrated approach to life, that in your 20s you can kind of have that latitude to make those mistakes. And time, as we know, is our most valuable asset, and you're leveraging your time in this space, in my opinion, very methodically. And it's a calibrated approach that you deserve some credit and praise for. So it's cool to see that someone who legally can't even drink yet has enough awareness to say, as long as I'm moving in the direction, then I know I'm making progress. How is it that you can bring on the caliber of guest that you can? Is it because you can too? What is the mission or the theme of the show that gets people excited about working with you and getting on the other side of the mic so you could ask them questions?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer because I think there's part of it that I detach from that I don't know. I don't know why they come on. I couldn't tell you why Seth Godin came on the show. Maybe because I had 150 episodes out at the time, and like we were speaking before this, you have to have 100 episodes, I think, for him to even consider going on. I think the thing that sets me apart is that most people, whether they're my age or they're not my age, don't shoot for those caliber of guests to begin with. So it reinforces the message of the podcast is we have to unlearn the beliefs that hold us back. It's not that we have to take on different beliefs, but we have to unlearn the beliefs that we have to let go of. Like a lot of people see themselves as, okay, I have to become something more to reach whatever next level of life I want to create for myself. I have to become something more. But what if you just had to let go of the parts of yourself that were holding you back? And I think looking through that lens through the podcast is like, I want to help people unlearn the belief systems that hold them back from just creating more for themselves in their life. So when I think of the caliber of guests, I think it's one, I follow up 1,000 times when most people won't even send the second message. I'm always willing to find the third door, which is, have you read the book, The Third Door by Alex Banayan?
I haven't, but we have a dear friend in common who has given me the summarized, synthesized version of it in at Book Thinkers, and we both know who we're talking about.
Yeah, I would say that that book, just the mindset of it in itself, I think it was just definitely a page turner. I'm looking at it as I'm saying this is it was a page turner because it continued to show me again, like Alex Bynum was speaking with Larry King and so many other amazing people that you wouldn't think you could get in contact with, but his relentless pursuit and commitment to making it happen, he just didn't have a belief in his mind that it wouldn't happen. He just continued to show up for it. And that's kind of how I see it through the podcast is at least this is the way I see it is rather than thinking of if it's going to happen, I think through the lens of when it's going to happen. Because I know it's going to. There's no way I'm going to stop this podcasting game in itself. I started at 17. I don't even think about where I'm going to be in 5 years from now because I know 10 years, 20 years, I'm still going to be doing this. And so I just think of when it's going to happen. And that means following up every 4 months or whatever it comes down to. It's just doing the stuff that most people just aren't willing to do and always finding a way, I guess is the best way to say it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Inspired. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I have a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of this content, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. You help us reach more people, and you can also stay up to date with all the latest content coming your way. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the episode.
I think that's one of the most effective ways to look at it, the mindset of inevitability. And that approach yields the fruits that we're after because we know it's just a matter of time till this goes down. It's simply a matter of when. And you said it perfectly. We talked about why people should listen to you. You outlined why not me. How did you start to think about the problem of you can too in this way, where you realize that you are just deserving of any of the other accolades or opportunities to sit down across a table and ask these caliber of questions? When did you think about the theme of you can too? Why the name?
I think the name was just seeing people do extraordinary things growing up, whether it was just online. I mean, I grew up the YouTube era, so that was a lot of what I was looking at. And seeing people do amazing things, it just continued to remind me. It was almost an affirmation I told myself, honestly, unconsciously, realistically. I didn't realize I was doing it, but the more that I thought about building a podcast, that was the only thing that I could think of. Like that was the only name that I ever thought of making the podcast from the beginning. Before I even thought about making a podcast, you can too was like just an affirmation I unconsciously told myself because I saw people do amazing things. And I genuinely think of the chair that I'm sitting in. Like it was once a thought in someone's mind. Even the rules that we live by in society is like they were once created by someone. And so everything started from someone. You might be looked at like you're crazy. I definitely got looked at like I was crazy when I started the podcast in my car, started making content on social media. Like I always say that the one thing that I cared about most was that I showed up. Like I started posting content on social media. I was terrified by it because I just graduated high school. I cared about everyone's opinions. Now I don't really care anymore because it doesn't matter to me. But it was a big thing for me in the beginning because the only thing that I cared about was, am I posting today? Am I actually doing the thing that I said I would do? And that built a lot of confidence in me being able to just show up enough times to actually achieve the results that I didn't think were possible at the beginning. So I think part of it is just seeing people do extraordinary things and reminding myself that it was possible for me. And then just seeing that the number one problem that most people deal with in life is that they don't believe in themselves enough. And if you don't believe that you can do something more, like, this is why the 1% is only 1%, because people don't believe there's a better life for them. I don't want people to go through their life getting to the end of their life with regret. Now, when it comes to like the podcast in itself, or how I believe that I'm able to speak with these kind of people, my first coach would phrase it as though he wouldn't call me out, but he would call me forward. And I always liked that framing, because he would call me forward in the sense that the only reason that I wouldn't be able to do whatever I want to do or put myself in a position to succeed is because I don't believe I'm worthy. But if you call me forward to it, it's like, okay, instead of calling me out, because that looks through like a negative lens, call me forward. It's like, you deserve to be here, pulling me forward. And I think the lens that I see it through is, you're one of one, and that's the lens that I've seen most of things through. We all see ourselves as though we're such a small peck in the world, and we're irrelevant and essential at the same time. So we're relevant in the sense that we're one small pebble in a rock floating in space. And then we're also essential in the sense that there is no one that can replicate what you can bring into the world. And so you do a disservice by not bringing your unique gifts into the world. And we all have those. We may not know what they are yet. It might take a long time to figure out what it is, but I would be doing a disservice if I didn't start the podcast, if I didn't start coaching, if I didn't start helping people. And I realized that when I was working with people, is that if I was too afraid to market on social media or talk about my coaching or whatever it was, well, I'm holding myself back from helping more people. And that was a lens that my coach kind of seen it through. And I think it's really helped for sure.
You just threw a lot out there. You threw a lot out there that I think people are going to have to go back, rewind 15, 30 seconds, re-listen, and think about deeply. Call me forward. We're irrelevant and essential at the same time. All aspects I've heard of in isolation, but never collectively. And I think when you hear a thread or a sequence of thought, you could hear things multiple times in your life. But when you're sitting down and you're in the present moment, it's still the first time that you're hearing something because you're hearing it in the present moment. So even if the words are familiar, the moment is new. So the information is being synthesized in a new way. And I think this is a prime example of that, where the irrelevance and the essentialism, there's a juxtaposition there where you actually get to embrace how imperfect and unique you are. And at the same time, you could take the fatalist approach where none of this matters, nothing matters, I'm irrelevant, my vote doesn't count, etc. But also realize that what makes you an individual is what distinguishes you, and your unique abilities and capabilities are special in and of themselves. And if you don't bring them to the world, you're doing the world a disservice. What's your self-talk like, man?
I think this year has been an expansion of how great I talk to myself, I would say. There's a quote, I think it was probably earlier this year, from Tom Bilyeu that I will get on the podcast. He said that all that matters is how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself. And that quote has stuck with me this entire year. It's probably been like the quote of the year for me, because I think a lot of us act out of, I mean, Alex Hormozy talks a lot about it as well, where we just act out of insecurity, we act out of inadequacy, and that drives us a lot. And I don't really like that reference. I mean, I think there's good things that come from it because you're going to drive a lot harder than a lot of people, other people will. But what are you running towards at the end of the day? And I really want to play infinite games in this life. And so I think it's got better for sure this year. And I think part of that is just doing what I said I would do, and really thinking about, how do I feel about myself when I'm by myself? If I'm not working, because I think as podcasters, as entrepreneurs, it's real easy to be a workaholic. I think it's got better this year, but it's a constant work in progress. That's for sure.
What are your inputs like? I see some books in the background. A few of them I've read, obviously. Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, Ryan Holiday. Also, I will bring you on the podcast. Tom Bilyeu, I will bring you on the podcast. 4-Hour Work Week, and some others I can't really tell. So I know you mentioned you read a lot. I mean, for me, I'll just go on another little tangent here. Like,
yeah, please.
I've talked about inputs a lot. I try to listen to the right content. I try, and your diet, right? This is something that is very important. Your diet isn't just the food that you eat; it's the information that you consume, and it's the environment that you surround yourself with. And if you're in an urban environment, if you're in nature, etc., if you're reading books or listening to podcasts or listening to music that's negative or distracting, you're not present and you're not fully engaged. Versus if you're reading books about personal growth or business or things that can call you and push you forward, naturally, those are the inputs that we all know we should be doing. But most of us don't have the awareness to recognize I'm diving deep into Netflix because I need to wind down from the long work day. I don't have the work capacity or the threshold by which I am pushing myself to is draining me and it's not leaving me fulfilled. So I find that when I listen to uplifting content or curating my Instagram feed or my X feed or my YouTube around content that's uplifting instead of listening or watching to a TV show at night, I'm sitting down and I'm watching a 40-minute speech by Patrick Bet-David, or because I'm deep. I just read his last book. I'm finishing his second book now, and I'm taking a lot of notes. I'm really big on the immersion aspect of things. So, what are your inputs like, and how do you go about, I guess, your immersion, if that's even the approach that you take?
Yeah, I think like I said, when I first got started, it was I definitely read a hell of a lot more than I do right now. But if I'm driving or if I'm walking or if I'm doing most things, I'm usually listening to a podcast or an audiobook or a YouTube video or something in that regard. I think there's a lot of people that I take inputs from. Yeah, it's a lot of podcasting. I think a lot of it's been podcasting this year in the sense of not even I don't really listen to too many podcasts, but I tune into podcasts that I have guests on the show. And so I think that's a really good way to it's like when you teach something, you learn it twice, right? And when you have someone on the podcast, I think that you probably feel this way too. When you're researching for a guest, the amount of immersion that you get in learning about that person, I think it just teaches you so much about how to apply it to yourself or how to live in a different lens or how to take little things from each person that you have on. And especially when you're speaking with amazing people on the show, it's really easy to take on a lot of those habits and a lot of ways of thought. And Patrick Bet David is awesome. There's so many people that I could give you on the inputs that come in, but I think podcasting has come in more than anything this year, outside of books. Really haven't read too much this year. I found myself reading too much and not taking enough action, and so this year I just kind of reset, I would say.
I find that to be so ironic considering where you also have a lot of your time spent with book thinkers, right? I'm going to call you forward, and this is something I learned from our mutual friend, Nick Hutchinson. Shout out to Nick. Setting the intention at the beginning of the book, when Nick came on the podcast earlier this year and we've developed a friendship separately, I'm constantly calling on him for things, and he's a great sounding board for me. He helped me I read every day. I don't touch my phone for the first 30 minutes of the day. This is well known at this point for anyone who consumes any of my content. I think that you need to kind of level set. And there's two different approaches. One, there's empty your mind and fill your mind, right? Like spend the time writing out your thoughts or whatever before you have new thoughts entering in. I'm of the mindset that I like to gear my brain up, like brain training. And instead of touching my phone, I'll read a book. And then with Nick, he helped me outline the idea of setting an intention for the book at the outset. And then every single time I go back to the book, I read the intention that I have for the book, and then I go into my reading. Some books obviously have a lot of actionable steps, some not as much. And I also have a place that I can keep all the notes and thoughts and underlining that I do where I'm like, oh, that's good. I could riff with that. Or, oh, that's good. I'm going to create some content around that from my own kind of interpretation of what I believe the content to be saying. So I'd call you forward to implement a bit more of that, because if you're sitting here telling me you're not reading, I feel like someone with your work capacity and your depth of thought, like I've alluded to a few times, there's a lot to be learned from books. And podcasting is obviously a great medium, but I think I'd like to hear a bit more of that from you, even if you've read in the past. But again, that's just my own personal take on it. Feel free to do with it as you wish. You mentioned you don't know where you see yourself in the next year or 5. I find that hard to believe. There has to be some sense of a vision that you're curating for the You Can Too podcasting community. Maybe you could share some of that with us.
I'll talk on the books really quick because I think there's a part of that I love. First off, love that you're doing the intention and everything with that. I think what I found myself doing was taking in a lot of books with no intention behind it, in the sense that I just wanted to read to say that I was reading rather than to read to get something from the book. I'm definitely always reading. It's just like I have books right beside me. I'm reading Radical Acceptance right now by Tara Brach. Great book, great book. And of course, all the books I couldn't even tell you. Funny enough, I've got so many books this year that my bookcase broke. So, like literally a few weeks ago, my bookcase broke. So I have a massive amount of books just sitting against my wall over there. So I definitely am reading. I think I find myself, because I'm prepping so much for podcasts, I'm just listening to more podcasts. But I love that. And I want to get back to reading more physical books, because what I found myself doing was just listening to audiobooks. And that's almost like a podcast at that point. When it comes to the vision, I think that I've really taken on so much of the perspective of, am I moving in the direction rather than the results for so long? That's been the kind of approach that I take to things. When I think of it, I definitely want to move into in-person interviews for sure. Like we spoke about the opportunity that I have in a few months from now that I definitely want to take up. I think the podcast, what it looked like earlier this year was I want to do 2 interviews a week. And for a couple months I've been doing that. I reached out on social media. I said, would you like some solo episodes again? And a lot of people said yes. So I'm going to put in some of those as well. I think with it in itself, I really try to not set metric goals, I guess you would say. Because I find myself, when we usually shoot for metric goals, we attach ourselves a lot. And that's just whether we're conscious of it or we're not conscious of it, it's a habit that we mentally do. We want to be evolving in some way. And so if I set a metric goal that I want to get 10,000 subscribers on YouTube and I don't hit that, I'm going to feel as though I failed. Right. And so I think that it's a good thing. I see goals as like goalposts. Like it's where I'd like to go, but I don't have to get there. Like maybe we're on like a road trip and we're just meeting. We're only halfway there. Like there's just so much further to go. So I've really gotten the habit of just enjoying the day to day, because I heard someone, I don't remember who it was, but that he wishes he smelled the roses more. And I find that happens for a lot of people, is that they wish they smelled the roses more. And I'll give you my perspective on why I don't think I have much vision. I lost my father and uncle both at 37 years old. My grandfather passed away a few months after, or right before he was about to retire. So like he didn't even get to experience his retirement. And so seeing a lot of people grow up, or a lot of people pass away growing up, it just continued to instill in me that if I'm not enjoying today, what is the point of achieving whatever I want to achieve tomorrow? What is the point of all of this if you're not enjoying the whole process in itself? And I find myself, and I talked with Eric Jorgensen about this on my podcast as well. He said he's not setting goals for 2024 because he's already an ambitious person. He's already doing what he needs to do to go to wherever he wants to go. But when he sets goals, he finds himself attaching himself too much to that. And after writing the Naval book, the happiness aspect of things, like happiness is just really when we attach ourselves way too much to our pursuits that we want to achieve. And so that's been something that's just continued to stay in my mind. And I think that if I'm doing what I want to do, if I'm doing what I said I would do, I'm winning. And I think that that's the kind of approach I've taken.
I'm very sorry about the losses to your family members. I think they'd be very proud of who you're becoming, for the record. When it comes to keeping promises to yourself, I think that there's definitely an element of that you're living into, and it's admirable. I think that the goal setting aspect is something I can't let go of just yet because I always need something to aim for, but I do treat them as milestones. And I recognize that, and there's a great quote that I always mention by Ross Edgley. He speaks about it in pertinence to fitness. Fitness is a journey that everyone should start and no one should finish. And I feel the same way about life in general, where all of this, everything that I'm trying to accomplish, whatever fitness challenge I do where we raise tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars for multiple different organizations, where I'm pushing my mind, body, and soul, blood, sweat, tears online to the limits, and it still feels like I have more to give. It's like you're never really there, and that's kind of the point, right? You got to appreciate the journey. But I still think that objective metrics are a great way to keep yourself humble while still striving for more. And then it becomes this I think I was listening to Sahil Bloom and Ali Abdullah talk about this. Abdul, pardon me, where it's not the hedonic treadmill, but this productivity vacuum where you're just like nonstop on this just hamster wheel of trying to be so super productive that you're just constantly doing things into the void. And I was like, damn, is it really that sad? Like, I don't think it's like that. I really do believe in impact. And I think that the best way to do it is to surround yourself with high quality individuals and to seek the insights and wisdom of others, but also to keep in perspective, like where you're at relative to where you want to be. And it's cool right now where you're at. The other aspect is, if you have too many voices in your head, you can't really listen to your own. And so, as many people as we both interview, right? Hundreds of guests and, tens and tens and tens of books. You have a great way, I've noticed, of listening to yourself and speaking to yourself that you should never lose and continue to cultivate. But also, just like we both know in the law, if there's enough evidence to shift your perspective one way to the other, like you're allowed to do that. So that's something that I think has also been really valuable. I love the ambition that you have for the pod and where you want to take things. I'm excited to see where you're going to take it. And there's a question that I pose to all my guests that I'm not going to pose to you. I guess we have that in common. And I think you may have a tough time answering it just based on everything that we talked about today. But if the future version of yourself from 10 years from now, assuming he's in that ideal spot, were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think he would say to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it goes back to the smell the roses more. I really think of that. I think as much as I want to achieve and as much as I try not to set goals, of course, we all want goals. I want to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. I want to get to whatever it is on wherever. We all set them mentally. I may not write them down on paper or whatever it comes down to because I don't want to attach myself to it too much. But I really want to smell the roses more, man. The idea of infinite games was something that came across to me really when I started the podcast. I think of that with the podcast. I think of that with social media. I think of that with coaching. I think of that in the gym. I'm starting to gain weight right now. I'm working with a trainer right now. Like that's something that I'm continuously trying to detach from as well. Everything that I'm doing, I'm playing infinite games, and I don't think I can lose if I don't stop. And so I just want to continue to instill that into me. And I find myself you speak about Ali Abdal. He's been a big impact on me for sure. Of the productivity, always trying to go. And I found a lot of people that achieve amazing things on the external level aren't happy internally. And so, like you said a minute ago, when it comes to the relationship that I have with myself, the kind of self-talk kind of thing, that's been a habit that I've really built this year of just checking in with myself, not even just journaling, but like recording voice memos to myself, like doing a checkup. Like I'm almost my own therapist in some regard because I built such a great relationship with myself. And I just want to continue to build that. So I would say just continue to smell the roses. Really be where you are so much because they fly by. The fact that I'm 20, the fact that I've been podcasting for 3 years is insane. It is truly insane. And I just feel like sometimes the years go by like they're days. Like the fact that 2024 is in a few days from now is mind boggling. And I think that that's what we'll all get to at the end of our lives is I wish I was more present in my experience and not trying to get somewhere rather than actually being where I'm at. And so I think that that's something I'm continuously trying to remind myself.
I'm super excited for everything you have coming, man. I think you're going to be right where you want to be in the next few years, and you'll have that level of fulfillment and happiness that seems like you're after and helping others find for themselves. So I'm very proud of you. I'm super psyched to see what you have coming. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Please let the audience know where they can keep up with your journey.
First off, thank you for having me, man. You carved such great questions and amazing conversation. Grateful for the opportunity to come on here, man. You've had some profound guests as well, and I'm grateful to be a part of those. To find me, you can find me at James Brackin IV on all socials and the You Can Too podcast on all socials, YouTube, James Brackin IV as well. But that's where you can find me, man. Thank you again. You're awesome.
My pleasure, man. Till the next one.